So the elder is someone who can look back at his life and smile, I suppose, really, and think, what an idiot I was then, And when you hear them talk like that, then it's inspiring because you think, well, there's hope for me.
Hey everybody, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Men with Purpose. Today I have the pleasure and an honor to be joined by Michael Boyle. Michael is a psychotherapist, a facilitator, a leadership coach, and a student of mythology. He's a certified leader with the Mankind Project in the UK and currently leads MKP initiatory trainings internationally. Michael is a designer and founder of the Abandofbrothers, which is a charity working with disaffected youth. In addition to that, he's also a founding partner at Olivier Mythodrama, where they work in the corporate leadership world using mythology and archetypes. Sorry, this was a bit of a mouthful. Michael, thank you very much for doing this, sir.
Good to see you. Good to be here.
Likewise. It's an honor and a pleasure, like I said. Normally, how we start these podcasts or these conversations is I invite the guests to just take a deep breath and just do a quick check-in, whatever is present for you right now.
I'm happy to be here involved in this conversation, wherever it takes me. A little bit nervous that you might ask me a lot of stuff I've got no idea about the answers to. So, but that's only a small part. So yeah, I can probably wing it if I.
I'm pretty sure you are. Yeah, you think you're overqualified. I'm checking in with a lot of gratitude. I really I feel incredibly privileged to witness these conversations and to kind of play a small part in them. So that's the thing I'm checking in. Right. So a little bit of background story. I met Michael, or we met at one of the MKP events in Sweden. I think it was November last year, and his presence and the way he led that event really was like, whoa, okay, this is a man I really need to speak to. I think there's a lot of depth into his story. So he was, very open to have the conversation. So here we are. I'm curious. So there's a lot of things I want to get into. I'm curious. We did talk a little bit about the fact that you've been in this work for a long time. Always, you have a background in facilitating other leadership events. How did you even discover this work? I know you did an MKP event back in '94, I think, if I'm not.
Yeah, correct. Even before that, I was studying to be a therapist. Okay. And at that time, it was mostly women involved, and a lot of tissue boxes, Kleenex boxes, and a lot of empathizing going on. And most of I usually was in the great minority in the rooms of the therapy rooms. And then one day I having read Bly's Iron John book, I finished up at an event with about 150 men with drums and a fairy story, and suddenly I realized this is where I needed to be. These guys look weird, they look dangerous, some of them look cookie, and some of them are, most of them are in their own way very interesting and very diverse group of people, and it went deep. And that Robert Bly and James Hillman, Michael Mead at that time were part of what became known as the mythopoetic tradition. They carried that on. And so I fell into that, and I thought, wow, this is what I needed to be learning when I was at school, about the soul and about initiation and about things that really seem to matter more than the everyday stuff that I had been involved in. Yeah. So then I got the idea that, hang on, this is very different to the work of the therapist, because it's much more experiential, much more intense. And then after that, I found out that there was a man some men in the United States who were actually doing initiation. Robert and Michael were talking about it, and we were doing these ritual workshops. But I then found the number of Bill Kauth. It was then called the New Warrior Training, now called the Mankind Project, and I phoned him up. And he invited me to come to the United States, and a few of us went out there. And that was in '94. So yeah, then 6 months later, we did our first training in UK. A group of us got together and made that happen. And we've been doing trainings ever since, really. Yeah.
Wow. So you've been at the very, very beginning when all the OGs were around. And
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate to have a good you know, a meaningful connection with those men, because the people that I knew were they were bringing over Robert and bringing over James. So I finished up chauffeuring him around. I chauffeured Robert Bly around the place and met him at airports and things like that. So yeah, it was a privilege, great privilege. Yeah.
Well, what an experience that must have been. I've watched most of his, I mean, most of the materials that I had online, but I would imagine this is what you got with him, right? The same man as he was on the videos is probably the same man in person.
Yeah, when I met him, he must have been in his mid-60s. And I'd never met anyone like him, because he was so sensitively, you know, he's a poet. And he, you know, obviously a great sense, but he was really funny, very funny and fierce too. You know, you didn't mess around with him. He could have an edge to him. And I thought, wow, when I'm that age, I want to be like that. You know, that's like, that's really, he was really alive, you know, and talking about interesting things with interesting people, and, you know, cutting the bullshit out. And the poetry was really what drew me, because it was, well, it's soul language, you know, and it doesn't explain anything, but it kind of awakens the soul. And I could feel that in the rooms where we were in, where a poem at the right moment was just, whoa, yeah, we get that. And it goes in deep, you know, it wasn't just some explanation of some theory. You know, it was the voice of somebody from the past that, you know, the words from their soul, and they were being repeated in this place, and with great respect. And Robert really woke me up to that. Yeah, the value of that.
And just to frame it, and maybe just to backtrack a little bit for people that don't know, this is kind of the 1980s, probably mythopoetic movement that kind of
for me, it was my first experience of that was 92. Yeah, but the late 80s, early 90s was where the men's work as it is now was really begun. And the psychological underpinning really is Jungian, Carl Jung. And James Hillman was a great Jungian therapist who was part of that revisioning psychology. He's written a lot of books, great psychologist, and underneath it a Jungian. So the combination of the stories, the Jungian psychology, and the poetry and the myth was something I found intoxicating, and I thought, well, this is meaningful. This is really meaningful. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, and I'd imagine you're probably a relatively young man back then, right? I mean, you are young now, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't know where the time's gone. You know, it's gone really quickly. I was late 30s. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm asking this because I can relate in terms of when I first experienced this sort of work and the way it really hit me. You know, words don't do it justice. Like, it's something really, like you said, food for the soul. It was really incredibly nourishing, and it's difficult to describe with words. And maybe it's not so funny that Robert Bly was a poet, so he was very eloquent with linguistics. And you know, that book over there behind me, Iron John, is great. Like, I tried to read it or reread it right now. So okay, let's fast forward right now. We're here today. People are, you know, tuning into this podcast and you're thinking, okay, what's this whole thing of men's work like? How would you describe it to a new initiative, let's say?
You mean, oh wow. Well, yeah, how would I describe it? You know, it depends who you're talking to. If someone is ready, they'll get it. Someone who's not ready to do the work, they won't know what you're talking about. And no matter how clearly you explain it, it won't be for them. So basically, what used to happen with males in the indigenous world, going back right across and back through time across the world, is at a certain point where the young man was taken from his mother and went and moved from the house of the mother to the houses of the fathers. And that was so that they could educate that young man in the things that that tribe needed. You know, they probably needed strong warriors, they needed good hunters, they needed protectors, they needed everything that they needed had to be passed on. The security of the child-mother relationship was totally respected. You know, nowadays it's about 3 weeks. You have 3 weeks time off, and it's suddenly over to the nanny and back to work. But this was, in the indigenous world, it went on for years. So that had to be broken in order for the boy to enter the man's world and then mature himself as a man. And of course, that can't just be a classroom experience. It had to be a full-blooded experience. And so different cultures all around the world in different ways, depending on the circumstances and what was appropriate for them, set up rituals which help the young man or the boy make that bridge from boy to man. And in doing so, he left the mother's left the mother, if you like, and was introduced to the world of the great mother, if you want. You know, how we are interconnected with the world and how we need to play our part and participate to feed the tribe and to benefit future generations. So he began to take responsibility, in other words, and that was a ritual to mature the male into responsibility. I guess you could put it that way. And of course, that went by the wayside, and it never happened, or it happens very, very infrequently in different places all over the world. And so I suppose the work with the men is an attempt to create a contemporary version of that journey for men. Yeah, you know, we're living in a culture that doesn't care whether you grow up or not. You know, it's an adolescent. You know, the more adolescent you are minded, the more stuff you're going to buy you don't need, maybe with money you haven't even got, and nobody cares about growing up really. So we have to do this for ourselves. We've had to do it for ourselves, and that's what's been happening. Once the men do it for themselves, they go through it, and then they realize that it's value, and then they stand there and they're ready to help the next lot of men come through.
Yeah,
and that's what's been happening now for the last 30 years, I guess. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, this whole movement really sparked something that was, I think, long lost, or at least it was the cusp of being lost. And this was kind of revival of these initiatory processes and really stepping into manhood. I think it was, I'm not sure if it was Carl Jung who said that there was a lot of men seem to be, a lot of people actually seem to be developmentally arrested, right? Something happened at a certain age, they got stuck into this kind of 15-year-old boys mentality, and then now you look at the shithole we're in right now. Politicians running wild, and I mean that's a separate topic in and of itself, but I think it's closely connected, I think, to a reflection of what's happening in society.
Well, you can make the case, they call it ego, don't they? It's about me and what. So, you know, if you think about the difference between men and women are innately connected to their biology and to the world through their own biology. You know, when a young girl becomes a young woman, there's her period. You know, she's actually connected to some profound pattern, a biological pattern, and that has its ups and downs emotionally. So she learns to ride those, and other women understand it, and they're there. And when she has a baby, that's even more of a miracle. And you know, so, but men don't have that. You know, there's that moment that we're all told is a crucial moment when you're very young, where you cry and nobody comes. Now that's a significant moment for everyone, because you suddenly realize that I'm on my own. I'm not part of my mother, you know, and fear comes in. But for the males, that happens twice. There's a double whammy, because there's a certain point a bit later on when you're being held by your mother, and the boy looks up and realizes that there's no continuity. I'm not one of those. Yeah. So if I'm not one of those, who am I? And he has to look further. That never happens for his sister. She knows, she's there, she can relate to that straight away. So he's out looking further then to try and find out, who am I? How am I going? What am I going to do in this world? So there's a lot more ego investment required in the male generally. And the ego is that part of me that keeps me surviving, it keeps me separate, keeps me special, keeps me looking for more, you know, and it's basically the initiatory process, you could say, was removing the ego from the center of the world. So instead of you could describe the shift from, you know, what's in it for me, to, you know, a journey which is basically saying, you know, how can I help? I want to make a contribution. How can I help? And that's a long journey from those two statements for some people, but it's kind of speeded up in the initiatory process, I guess. Yeah. So it's natural for men to have more ego, and it's natural that in doing so, they will be in competition with each other. They'll create pecking orders. Will be counted, who's got the most powerful, this, that, or the other, more money, biggest car, and all that nonsense we get caught up in. I know I did in my early years. But ultimately, there's never enough to satisfy me. I was never satisfied. I had more money than I needed, but it didn't. My soul was dying. So yeah, that's my story. So the whole ego, the Jungian idea of ego, and to individuate, which means to grow to the point where you become totally who you are. So it's important for people to know that if they're first into the men's group stuff, there's no pattern that you have to follow that to be a man. It's to be a man, but mostly it's to be your own man. Whatever that means for you and whoever you are, we're encouraging you to be it, live it out, bring it. And you're the only one that knows what that feels right for you. Yeah.
Wow. The thing that I like about this work, it's not just intellectual. It's not just sitting down and talking about it. I can't remember who said this. It was another man that I actually work with, Michael Gay. He said that sometimes when trauma happens, it happens in the parts of the brain where language is not accessible.
Yeah.
Yes. And so you need an experience to really be able to hold this big energy, whatever it is that you're working with. And these containers serve exactly that purpose. It's an experiential event that you're not supposed to talk about it, and that's for a good reason. So yeah.
Well, the whole emotional, I think it's fair to generalize and say that, again, women seem to be closer and more in touch with their emotions than men do. And yet we are, as men, we are dictated by our emotions. We just don't want to know, so I've got some fear coming up. The last thing I want to do is feel that. So I'll go and distract myself. I'll act out in any way. I'll maybe get addicted to something, whatever it is, anything, but stay there and feel the emotion. So part of the initiation process is to learn about emotions, and that it's really a barometer. It's really a part of us that just gives us an important message that some things need to be paid attention to. I usually say it's like the phone ringing or something. If you don't answer it, it's going to keep ringing. No matter how you take the phone off the hook or you try and distract yourself, but the phone keeps ringing. So the men's work is very much about picking the phone up, find out what these feelings are, and because we're staying with them, they don't have power over us anymore. We're not running away from them. We can get power over the emotion by just welcoming it in and allowing it to happen, getting the message and dissipating it. And that can be done. And that's the key part of the work, really. Not to get pushed around by your emotions, particularly fear and anger. For men, of course, everything can look like anger. Every emotion looks like anger. The only one that's acceptable,
Yeah.
I'm scared to death. As long as I can look angry, no one will notice I'm scared.
Yeah. And then you realize you're not a special snowflake, and then we're more alike than we are different. So, sure. We touched upon emotions, and I wanted, because such a big theme in this work is really working with the shadow. Can you, for people that are maybe hearing this term for the first time, or maybe have heard bits of it, don't know what it is, maybe can you give a short breakdown of that?
Well, very briefly, everything that I find unacceptable about myself, I'm going to push into the unconscious. I don't want to know about it. So all of my inadequacies, my greediness, all of the things that are not acceptable out there in the world, I just push away and hide. Yeah, they go into the unconscious, but they're always present there. So they're going to come out when I'm least conscious. And when am I least conscious? When I'm least conscious, when I'm stressed, when I'm really busy, when I'm tired, those are the times that those things are going to come out. And, and people say, oh, I don't know what happened. I didn't mean it, and of course you didn't. I mean, you didn't have a choice, So everything buried away, anything squirreled away that you you don't want to look at because it's too awful to look at, which is part of you, will actually come back to haunt you. So part of the work is actually looking at what we call the shadow. The shadow is usually found in somebody else. So you can find out a bit about your shadow by just pointing the finger at someone you really can't stand, and then pulling the finger back to you and say, hey, hang on, that's a reflection of me out there. The good news is that it works both ways. You know, if you repress huge potentials, valuable gifts in your life, that, you know, it's easy to put that onto someone else too and say, you know, those people are really good at that, or I really admire. Again, one way of retrieving the shadow is find out who you really admire and point the finger at him or her, and then try and own that for yourself, because you wouldn't notice what that in them if you didn't recognize it, which means to know again. So the shadow is both what they call dark and gold. You know, it's buried stuff that we don't want to be conscious of, which will always play a part in us as soon as we get blind to it, it's going to come out. And usually, in the case of the dark shadow, it's usually making someone else wrong, making someone else the enemy. You know, I can see how wars are started that way, by pointing fingers at someone else. And you notice, you know, in the world out there, there's so much polarity at the moment. You know, that I noticed the other day, this political, all these anti-hate people behaving so hatefully. You know, it's crazy.
Are you talking about the woke mob, or just people?
Well, anything, you know, anybody who's pointing fingers at some politicians do it all the time. They're pointing fingers at some other people and not owning anything for themselves.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we'll come to a day when that ends. But until it does, we've got endless disputes and polarity that go nowhere. You know, we see it in the Parliament all the time. I was looking at it the other day. What a pantomime that is. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yeah. It's wow. I mean, that's another topic in and of itself. Sometimes I wish we can lock up all the. I mean, you can't really make men do this work, but really lock them up in a room and just like ask them to go through something like this. Like, I wonder what's gonna happen.
Yeah, well, you get a lot of denial at first.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are people who come on. There are men who come on and just have to leave because they can't face themselves.
It's too intense sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's okay. They'll come. Hopefully, the time will be right, and they'll come back when they're ready. I mean that before. The readiness is all. You know, you can't just go along and be curious. You got to be ready for a radical change, a radical transformational change. Something, you know, in archetypal terms, something has to die. Some part of you has to die. You know, the part of the boy that is the victim, or the one who's blaming everybody else, that's got to go. And you have to. Something's got to be born in you, which is a part of who you are and what your contribution is. You know, it's got to wake up. That's the spirit of it, really. Yeah.
I want to ask you a question exactly about that, because I wouldn't say called out, but I thought it was an interesting comment where another guest that I had before, Philip Folsom, he mentioned the same thing, like the boy has to die for the man to be born. And another man who's also in the same space, he said, you know, I push back a little bit on the fact that the boy must die. Maybe the boy should stay within us because we want that part of the boy to be there. So how do you make sense of both of those?
The greedy boy who is a victim and won't take responsibility. That guy he's got to go. Gotcha. You got to shine some light on him. And when you shine some light on him, what happens is you automatically, what becomes more into focus is the boy that you like to be. You know, the one who had a lot of fun and who got shut down. I mean, I always make a big deal about excitement. You know, excitement is a really powerful emotion. We don't mention it much, but what happens is when I was a child, this is what happened to me. When I was excited and really having a good time, it usually involved something I shouldn't be doing. So it wasn't long before I got a shout or a clout or something. You know, so pretty soon I learned, be careful when you feel good, because you know it's not going to last long, and adults don't want to be around excited kids. It annoys them. You know, they want you to be quiet and shut up.
Man.
And you know, what's that joke about? You know, that they try and get you on your feet to stand up and walk and speak, and then when you can do that, they want you to sit down and shut up. So it's very confusing. So
wow,
excitement in all of us gets kind of stulted. And actually, excitement is my body, your body's emotional compass for your true north. What you get excited about is really important to know, because you're going to get excited about something and another guy isn't, and that's because there's something in there for you that you want to reach, that you want to be part of. That's, you know, so yeah, the little boy has to die who's you know, who's not going to take any responsibility, who's going to whine and whinge and complain and be a victim. He's got to go. You know, in a good way. You kind of, you don't hurt him, right? It's just, you acknowledge, you shine some light on him and say, you don't need to be that anymore. Have some fun. Get back to the excitement. Get back to the fun, and have that boy come on in the driver's seat. Yeah.
Okay, that's beautiful. Thank you for kind of laying it in this way. So a lot of this work, at least what I'm led to believe, is a huge pillar of that is the presence of an elder. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that? What's the significance of that? Maybe also, I mean, myths, let's touch upon it in a second, but like the presence of an elder, that's incredibly important for something like this.
Yeah, so we don't have, I mean, is there a process for knowing what an elder is? You know, what's the difference between an older and an elder? You know, just because you've clocked up a number of years doesn't make you an elder. I would think in indigenous societies, I don't know this for a fact, but I don't think anyone went around saying, hey, you know, I've just had my birthday, I'm an elder now. I think the elders were actually pointed out by the rest of the tribe because they had earned the right to be an elder, because they had proven themselves over a long period of time through experience and wisdom that they were worth listening to. So how do you reproduce that process now? You know, that we're in our society, there's not adequate respect for elders, let alone elders, and so I would like to see all that change. Obviously, you know, the going back to politicians, you know, maybe we need to elect people who've got a track record of doing good in society, and a track record of being selfless and generous and fighting for good causes. Those are the people that I want to be in the parliament. So I think an elder is someone who's kind of mythologized their life, really. They can look back and look about all the mistakes, and there's usually a whole string of them if you're honest, and just redefine them as learning experiences, which they are, if you know, or else or initiatory moments. The whole idea of initiation continues all the time. You know, we're always initiating ourselves. We're always beginning again. We're always renewing ourselves. So the elder is someone who can look back at his life and smile, I suppose, really, and think, you know, what an idiot I was then. You know, how did I ever do that? You know, I thought this once. And when you hear them talk like that, then it's inspiring, because you think, well, there's hope for me. This guy's, you know. Yeah. So I think elders need to be able to mythologize their life, find the meaning in it all, you know, and not have regrets or unresolved emotional stuff, and you know, they've forgiven, and they're funny, you know. And I think that's where I go back to when Robert Bly was a bit like that for me. When you know, he wasn't a saint, but he understood the value of humor to bring people out. And he had a way of looking at things, and he could shout. And the other thing about that they talk about in the blessings, they talk about the blessings of the elder. You've heard that, of course, you know. Yes. And I always think of, you know, the Archbishop of Canterbury or something putting his hand on it, which puts me off totally. But a blessing is the elder's capacity to really precisely notice something. So I'm looking at you, Pav, and I could say, Pav, you're really fabulous. You know that? I think you're wonderful. Yeah, and then what do you think? You think, yeah,
stop it.
But you know, it's not really a blessing. A blessing would be, Pav, you've taken on this work, and you're interviewing people in the men's work because you care about it, and you've got your equipment there, and you're making no trouble because you've got something to offer. You're a specific type of journalist. And that's really, you know, that's a very unusual stance that you've taken, and I want to honor you for that. You see, that's more of a blessing because it's precisely yours, you know. And the other side of that is that if you're an elder, and you can bless people. I think you got to be able to curse things, you know. You
Mm.
got to be able to say, hey, that's not right. You know, that's not for us. That's out of bounds. You know, we're not having that. That's I think it's for the elders to also call that out too, and that requires a little bit more courage.
Mm.
So I think we're still in the learning process for the elders. Yeah, definitely. And there are some great elders around. They just don't know they just don't claim it, or they don't own it. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one of the greatest. I mean, I want to say tragic because I don't want to over dramatize something, but we've really neglected a generation. I think we've lost a generation of elders. Whether it intentionally, socio-economical changes, cultural changes, yada yada yada. But I remember after the event, we spoke with some of the guys, and they kind of said the same thing. Like, I really wished I was seen by another man the way I was, let's say, here by an elder. So I think, boys are really yearning for this kind of manhood and initiation, even though it's very difficult to describe it with words. But it is something that is maybe epigenetic, and I think we have epigenetic responsibility. I keep saying this on episodes, but to really go deep down and touch that shadow and make out of that whatever we can. But it's a responsibility.
Yeah. The what were you saying just now? I just forgot what I was going to say. You were talking about.
I was talking about the fact that we've lost elders.
Oh, the elders, yeah.
Yeah, and the fact that we have epigenetic responsibility, and the fact that we're yearning for this manhood, but we don't even know it.
Yeah, there is something about. Robert used to say, if you're a young man and you're not being admired by an older man, then you're being abused by an older man. That's a big thing to say. If you're a young man and there's no older man in your life who admires you, who's actually recognizing you, acknowledging you as for who you are, then you're going to feel alienated, and you're going to feel as though these men who are ignoring you are actually abusing you, even though they're just ignoring you. They're not involved with it at all. If they're looking the other way, you're getting hurt. Yeah. And then you're into this whole question of initiation was always undertaken by unrelated older men, not by the fathers. The father can't do that. There's a whole lot of issues with the father always. And so, one of the things is, you're both interested in the same woman. That's his wife, and that's your mother, and and there's all sorts of dynamics in there that don't. So you can't be initiated by your father, really. And maybe your father maybe he can't really see you for who you are. Maybe it takes a stranger to be able to look at you and say, I see you. I see your talents there. I see what your aptitudes are. I see your potential, And maybe the father's going to say that anyway because he's your father. But it lands differently when you hear it from an unrelated older man. You understand what I mean?
Yes, sir.
So that mentor elder thing, the relationship between the young men and the older men, is key. It's really important. Yeah.
I would imagine right now, and maybe again I'm reading too much into this, but I think it's safe to say that there is a fatherless crisis right now, especially in the US. I'm not sure. I lived a very long time, almost 10 years in the UK, so I think there is also something about that. And so it kind of makes me think, okay, if all the fathers are gone, like, who's going to initiate these men, like one way or the other? Like, and I think mentors is something that I've really looked up to and searched like pretty much all my life, and still am to some extent. But those are the people, those are the men that have to, I think they need to step up and really initiate those. So the importance of having a mentor is, I think, understated. Like being an apprentice with someone that's like, it's a lost art, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you could say that I agree with you about the more of a fatherless society, but we've lost the tribes. We lost the tribes a long time ago. And all this pressure went into this small family unit thing, which is hard. It's a very pressurized thing. It's not so pressurized when you've got the community, when you've got uncles and aunties and everybody else living in close proximity, because then the kid can go out and find someone else, and there's a village. They say it takes a village to
raise a boy.
raise the child. Well, we lost the villages. We lost the tribes. We lost. So if there is, now that the family unit is breaking down even more, there's even more need now for community. And that's because if you initiate a young man, you've got to initiate him into something. You can't just give him a training weekend and take him out in the woods and say, right, thanks, have a good life. You know, he's got to, from his life from that point on has changed. There's a responsibility as an initiator to be part of that ongoing process for that young man. And that's the need for community. And that's what, you know, a lot of the men's work now is they inevitably do build community. That's what Band of Brothers is all about. It was all about bringing in the disaffected youth, training local men to be confident mentors. And that's a whole nother story of how we do that. And then, you know, lighting the fire and saying the fire is here and it's always going to be here for you. You can come. You don't have to come every week to the fire, every month. But if you come back next year, the fire will still be burning and you'll all still be welcome, because that's our community fire. And we take care of each other. And so those things are tremendously valuable, particularly when a lot of the boys we worked with Band of Brothers had pretty, I should say politely, it's complicated family backgrounds. You know, it wasn't, not a lot of them didn't have a great relationship with an older man. In fact, sadly, you know, the big common denominator in prisons, of course, is, you know, no interested father there.
Yeah.
And so you get to the point where you listen to the young man's story and it leads into prison. And then you just think, well, how could it not? You know, given what he had to put up with and how his emotional life was in turmoil and how angry and everything, and all of the things all the emotional turmoil that the young man, how could he not finish up in prison? And unfortunately, in our society, you know, no one spends any money on these youngsters until they do something wrong and they've got to be punished. That's where the money comes in. So community, back to community. Community can save them. We can help each other with community. And it works all the way through from the very youngest up to the oldest elder, ideally. You know, that would be an idealized version of it. Yeah.
Yeah, there was this great story by I think it was a writer, Richard Rowe. He was saying about a story that, you know, some scientists went in Africa, and there was this, you know, young elephants attacking other animals, other elephants, etc., etc. It really came down to the fact that, you know, the big old male elephants were, you know, poached for their tusks, and there is no one to kind of regulate and really show them like, hey, this is what's up. So,
well, that's street gangs. Right there, you know, the street gangs, and there are no elders in the street gangs.
Yes.
So everybody knows the same nothing, but at least it's somewhere to belong. You know, it's
a pseudo initiation. Yeah, it's a pseudo initiation, but we have this need to belong somewhere. So
yeah.
Okay. What does mythology come in all of this? Because in this type of work, especially with the Mankind Project, that seems to be, I think mythology is all over us. Like we are part, you know, comprised of rituals, if you will, and mythology seems to play a part. Can you maybe unpack that a little bit?
Yeah.
Especially within the work.
You know, we're all unconsciously or consciously, we've bought into a story. You know, of how the world works, of how life is, what it's about. You know, most people are not really aware of the story they bought into, unless they were, you know, and then strongly involved in a religion, and they've got a story there. So mythology is where we find meaning, really. In any transition, you know, if you're going to make a change from one, it has to be underpinned by a story. You have to know what the story is that you're involved in, so that you can feel part of and connected to. So I mentioned earlier on about the initiation in the indigenous world, where the consciousness is raised by the sacred story of whatever that tribe was. They pass those stories on to the young men so that they can feel part of the continuity of that story. And of course, we've lost a lot of that, because the story now is, grab as much stuff as you can and collect it all together and then buy some more. I was reading the other day that the biggest business, the one that, apart from COVID related, the businesses in UK that are thriving the most are storage businesses.
Wow.
People got too much stuff. They don't know what to do with it. They don't want to lose it. It's, keep your stuff and just pay for it to be looked after over there. And people forget that it's even in there. So our story is one of acquisition. That if you want to make it in life and be happy, there is a story that says, well, you just get enough money and you'll make it there. There's a mythology a rising mythology now, interestingly enough, of it's running directly countermand to what's happening in the COVID world. In the COVID world, there's a thing called social distancing. I don't know what the hell is social about distancing, but it's this 2 meters thing.
Oh boy!
And then the fear, and the don't go outside, and not breathing properly, and swallowing your CO2, and all of that stuff, and actually the truth, the mythological truth of what we can all be, and it separates everybody. That's the main thing. I'm on my own, and when I'm on my own, I'm more manipulable. I can be frightened and controlled. But once I realize that I'm part of everything and everyone's connected to everybody else, that changes the game wholesale. Once I realize that I live in 2 dimensions, that I'm not just in this material world, that in the 3D, I'm actually, there's a part of me that's connected to all that is.
Yes.
And so I can be much more self-referenced. So that's what the work does, the men's work does. Takes you into a self-referencing place where you know that your state of being is more important than the circumstances, because your state of being changes the circumstances, right? So you keep your own vibe up, you keep a high frequency. All you have to worry about is that, and everything else kind of fades away and it deals with itself. But while I'm out there forgetting about my sense of my soul, my sense of self, and I'm trying to fix all these things out there and get this and fiddle that and talk with him, and it's just exhausting. And so the mythology now is a much more internal mythology about who am I in my. It's back to that thing I said before. Is what's in it for me is the grabby thing. It's the acquisition, and then later on comes the how can I participate, and that's a great question, particularly for men. What do you have to offer? What's my purpose? How can I participate in bringing my gifts and what's important to me to bring it? So bring it without having to worry about what I get back. I'll always get back what I need, but if I just have something to participate with. So that's a much more internal mythology. But how I see myself as a participator in creation. We're all such creative beings, but the part of us that's been closed down, a lot of it, it's not just the emotional stuff, it's the imagination that's been closed down. School does a pretty good job of that,
Yeah, you said so many things there that I'm just like, yeah, I want to dissect this. And still this whole thing with COVID, and I'm not the guy to be politically correct. You believe what you want to believe, you subscribe to any club that you want, but this whole thing is there is a great guy, Matthias Desmond, who was talking about the fact that
the Belgian guy,
that we are in this kind of mass psychosis, and I mean that's another conversation, and I don't care, like it's my podcast, so we'll talk about it.
It's fear. There's a lot of fear out there.
Yes.
And the other thing you learn in the men's work, of course, is that we're clever people. We've read all the books. We can figure things out, and we're intelligent and intellectual. And we're also very judgmental. You're very judgmental. And the moment I judge something, I'm creating a distance between me and it. Yeah. And then what I do is I don't know whether you do, I get a label and I stick it on that person, right? And pretty soon, all I can do is I read the label and I know who they are. I don't have to worry about it, complicate it, whoever else. Everything else about that person gets lost. And there's no connection. So the judgment thing that happens up here, this thing up here, is kind of overrated, and it separates us. And this is where the fear comes in. Of course, the survival mechanism in the reptilian brain is about, it's ego, it's thinking, it's, am I okay? Will I do well? Are they seeing me?
Mm.
And actually the shift, it's a very short, very significant shift, is into the body. And do you when you come with me in the body a second, just come down into your heart here. There we are. This thing's not just a pump. It's got neurons in it, and it's got a electromagnetic field way more powerful than the brain. And this is what connects us here to each other and to the world. And so the more we speak from, I can come up with an opinion in my mind about something, and when I come down into my body, I can look at the same thing and can have a completely different idea about it. And particularly around other people, I just have more compassion when I have more, we talk about love. Love is a great word, but inside love are actually lots of other components, if you like, of love, of compassion, kindness, generosity. All those things are all parts of love, and they all come from the heart. And when we learn to speak from the heart, which we do which is one of the things that happens in the men's work, then there's a tempering of the man. The tempering. He's more present with himself and with his nearest and dearest. So that's a significant part of the mythology. Moving away from mythology of being clever and trying to find out the cleverest idea and the most intellectual answer. And
yeah.
All the time in intellectual circles where someone's kind of trump each other with more information about some expectation.
Yeah. Something that I can't help but think, and it's so beautiful, I get super emotional just by thinking about it, is I've read a bunch of books, I've done some interviews, and been around a little bit to understand the virtue and the value of this work. And I see all these initiates, they're like sheep, just coming in, not knowing what's about to happen, maybe labeling people, putting some judgments, like every other man would do. And then the amount of courage, strength that shows up especially when you're on the mat. Let's talk about, let's not talk about in details, but talk about the experience itself. Just the willingness. It's something inside, like maybe in the heart. This is kind of my interpretation of it. They're just there, and instinctively they know what they need to do. They need to be there to support the other man. And this willingness, this camaraderie, this shared experience is just.
Yeah. And it's completely natural. That's the way things are. Most people would do whatever they can to help somebody else. That's who we are naturally. So when we drop the thinking and we go into the body, then there's no thinking involved in getting there. Now, if I go into fear, then there's thinking involved in being scared. I'm thinking my way through to all sorts of negative emotions about me, everything. If I just drop all that, stop the thinking altogether, go into my body, there's no thinking required. And this is where our natural state of love is. It's naturally there. I don't have to think. It's thinking that's the problem. Well, you could equate thinking a lot with the ego, really. So dropping the ego brings you into your natural self, which is connected to all the other natural selves, which are connected to, as the and one example is the Native Americans had a fantastic ecological sense of themselves in the scheme of things, and they knew that they were connected to all that. Well, they used to put that phrase there, "Metakwes," all my relations. I'm related to everything.
All my relations,
yes. Everything else, yeah. And they also had this interesting idea. The Plains Indians had this really good idea about shadow, because they in the Cree people they call it Watiko. Have you heard of Watiko?
No.
Watiko it's an interesting concept. It's Watiko is the evil spirit that enters me the moment I forget that I'm connected to all that is.
Wow. Wow.
So that's ego right there. It's the ego coming in. I'm special, I'm different, I'm nothing to do with that. So that's a really powerful thought. That was their notion. Wetiko, of course, rules the world now. Really, Wetiko is not interested in the connection world. So that's the game we're in. And
yeah, I'm surprised. Like this was like the perfect. I mean, let's not even get into this whole COVID thing. I have my very strong opinions, which are not really popular, but I've never really been a politically correct guy. So I think it's mental suicide to be politically correct. But again, that's in and of itself is another topic. Yeah, there's a friend of mine who tells me he taught me NLP and helped me out with that a lot. He says, thinking is overrated sometimes. So, yeah.
Well, the more invested we are in our thinking, we're losing a lot of our power. If a lot of those thoughts are anxiety thoughts, which they often are because they're in the subconscious and they're trauma related, as you hinted to earlier on, from earlier parts of our life, then we're really disempowering ourselves. So the part of the work is actually allowing those feelings to come up and dissipating them, realize that they're all part of the past, and just to be present. Just to be present is an enormous. I don't think there's anything else you could possibly do that won't be enhanced by being present with it. And I'm not worried about the future. I'm not worried about what's happened. I'm
right here.
Yeah, I get it. I can feel you right here. We don't know what's going to happen next, Pat.
No, nobody knows.
Nobody knows what the next question's going to be.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to figure out now as well.
Yeah. But there's a quality in the present moment that gets lost in our thinking. Yeah. Because if I'm thinking, I'm not really here. I'm only here when I'm not thinking.
Let me just try to think about. I think I spoke to this gentleman, Raphael Morgan, and he was saying he is in the UK as well. He's in the UK as well. Similar age, maybe you guys know each other because he's also been in California and
I don't know him, no.
Okay. But anyway, he was basically saying something, and probably gonna butcher this. So he says something about the fact that men being too much in their head are kind of mentally castrating themselves. And what they need to do is they really need to go out into the world and kind of reclaim their balls back and really be more into the body. So he was referring the exact same thing that I think you're making the point of be back, come back here into the present, into the body, really feel that with the breath. And there's a shift that happens there.
Yeah, Qigong has got a lot to offer in that area about how we, it's energy related. About how we draw energy from the earth and from the how we can really be together. There are lots of those semi-martial art programs, a lot of indigenous wisdom from China, and yoga, of course. All of those things do the same thing. They bring us back into the wisdom of our bodies. I suppose the initiatory stuff is just that. It's just a beginning, and so suddenly all this stuff opens up. The initiatory thing is just going through a portal. And suddenly I realize I'm not who I thought I was. It's a much bigger deal than that. And it's more exciting. And I'm more in control than I thought I was too. I can't be a victim and blame other people. I'm in charge. And all I have to worry about is my emotional self and be in my heart, and things will magically change around me.
I think that's partially why I think the message of Jordan Peterson really hits home for a lot of men from what I've seen. The fact that, taking your responsibility, don't worry about the world, like fix your damn room, fix your bed, and then kind of start from there, right? So
no, taking responsibility. Yeah, absolutely. That's his thing. I don't know much about Jordan Peterson other than the clean up your room thing. I'm sure I know there's a lot more to him than that. But I like the stance. Yeah,
the metaphor. Yeah.
And then you feel better about yourself, and you move on to the next thing. Yeah.
But, what else can you do, like besides like starting from here, right? Like with your own thing. That's kind of the difficult bit, right? Someone's gonna say, "Oh, but Pav," or Michael, but like this shadow work or this whole thing is difficult. It's meant to be difficult. It is,
but you can't do it on your own.
Yeah.
People, and that's the thing that you're there. You have to. I mean, men have good reasons not to trust men often, and there is a certain surrender involved. There's a certain surrender involved in the whole initiation process. You have to give yourself over in some way, and that often means trusting other men who you may not know. And somehow you got to conjure up that trust, and that's for men who've suffered at the hands of other men. Sometimes that can be very difficult for them. I really appreciate that, but you can't do the work on your own. You do have to throw yourself in, and of course, the thing that happens very frequently is that because I'm dealing with these difficult emotions and no one knows my story and they don't know how hard it's been, I turn up there and I feel really alone in that story and really alone in those emotions. But suddenly I hear another guy across the other side of the room, and oh wow, he's been reading my diary. What's he doing? And so the Me Too thing. Well, it's a positive Me Too. Yeah, you too. Yeah, me. I felt that way. Really, I thought it was just me. So suddenly I'm not such a freak, and I'm just in the swim with all these other guys who are struggling with the same thing as me, and that brings a collaboration and a bond in the group, and a willingness to say, okay, let's go a little bit further and find out more. Yeah, but that initial opening up is hard because there is a sort of a trust involved that some men might understandably find hard.
Right. Wow. My head is racing. There's a lot of questions I want to ask. I want to be careful also with the time as well. But in your opinion, what can we do right now to help future generations? So, all the young boys that are kind of coming out of age and maybe need, let's say, a powerful mentor or a community. What can we do right now as men to have an impact on those future generations?
Show up for them. Be generous with yourself. Prioritize some time. Give it away. Give yourself away. Go counterculture. Give up some time. Allow yourself to be vulnerable enough so that they can see you're real and they can trust you, and do whatever you can do to generate trust for the youngsters so that they can depend on you. It's interesting what I've heard from a lot of men who say, yeah, I want to help the youngsters, but what do I know? And I say, well, look, how old are you? And he says, well, I'm 45. I say, you're still alive? You're breathing? So yeah. So I said, well, you got what it takes then. That's fine. That's all. There's a lot of these kids that they can't even imagine getting to 45. So you're still alive and breathing. You found a way to navigate the world, mate. You found a way in there, and you've got some way of dealing with things, and they need to know that. They need to be around men who can do that, and don't take that lightly. That's a lot. To survive is a lot, and to survive in a healthy way too. That's even more wonderful. So get involved is what I would say to that, really, and realize that we all have a responsibility. There's no one who doesn't have a responsibility in this new world that's going to come. When all this COVID stuff fades away, which it will, we're going to have some major differences and transitions of how we organize ourselves and what our priorities are. And that's badly needed. So maybe all this will come out well. But one of the things is, there's no lone rangers. Everybody impacts everybody else.
Yeah, no man is an island, right?
That's right. Yeah. So, if an adult man walks into a group of 2 or 3 young men and just walks past them, he thinks he's not having an effect. No, he's had an effect. He's just reinforced the message to those kids that they're not worth saying hello to, or he's frightened of them. And so he's just reinforced the message, we can frighten older guys. Yeah. So you're always having an impact one way or another. You can't help it. That you're always giving out, you're transmitting a message. We're all receivers and transmitters all the time. So take responsibility for what you're transmitting and get involved, take a risk and be generous. Yeah.
Again, not to pump up my friend James, but he always says, like, you cannot not communicate. Even your silence means something, right? So, and I can't help but notice sometimes I'll go and train grappling or like jiu-jitsu, and I get my ass kicked because I'm a newbie, but it's a good thing for the ego. You get really humble there. But then you see some of these other men who are, let's say, younger boys, and I'm 32, soon to be hopefully 33. But there is something that I feel there, right? Maybe they're looking up to me in a way that's, I don't know, looking for approval or something it is. And I can feel that. And before I couldn't, and I thought I can't really contribute. But the moment I started being a little bit more cognizant of these dynamics, and then you're like, oh, wow, okay. It's, coming back to what you said. So, speak with them.
They're trying to find, they're really, if you're talking about teenagers and early 20s, they're still trying to find out who I am.
Mm-hmm.
Who am I? And the only way they can do that is to bounce off the world and find out, So they need some good experiences, and they need acknowledgement. They need from you, a guy like you, they just want a bit of eye contact and, how you doing, man? And that respect helps them respect themselves. And a little bit of interest, acknowledgement, so that they find themselves by interacting with other people. I think men probably do that more. Women do it more naturally with a flow, because they're in a lot more conversation. They can exchange a lot more words than men. We know. Yeah.
Yes, sir. All right. Listen, we need to follow up. We need the number 2, number 3 episode, but part 2, part 3. But I want to be respectful of your time. Any final words? Anything that you want to leave the audience before we kind of wrap things up?
Wow. Any final words? Well, thank you is my word for you to do what you're doing. For those people who are new to the whole men's work thing, take a look. It has a good effect generally on men, and on women, of course, and the children. That's the whole idea. I was once at a conference, and a lot of feminists there. That there was a book out called "Do We Really Need Men Anymore?" Something like that. That was the title, and the author was there, and these other women. They were quite hard-nosed feminists, And I remember I got in trouble for saying the thing about feminism for me is it just doesn't seem very feminine. That was they really hit me with that. But at the end of it, somebody suggested what are men for, and it was going back to the original. Is to protect and to provide for the children and the women and the earth, and all of this diverse group went fairly quiet with that and didn't dismiss it. And it was the first time the whole day where people went, okay, fair enough. And I thought, okay, that'll do me. I'll accept. I can take that. If I'm here to protect and provide for the children, the women, and the earth, that's not a bad job. And maybe that's what men are for, or at least part of it. Yeah. And to be creative, of course. We're creative beings, as are women, of course.
Yeah, the way I think about men is just really being of service when it comes to it. Like, it's not just the big muscles, and that in and of itself is never really, I think, a way to define a man. But there is a difference between, by the way, I don't want to get into your flow, but just want to add this. There's a difference between a man and an adult male human being. One doesn't necessarily constitute the other. Yeah.
In the new world that we're evolving into, there'll be the takers and the givers, and the ones who understand how the energy works won't be afraid of giving, because they'll get back when they need, and that's what's already happening at the moment. That's the awakening that's actually going on right now as we speak. It's about what you take; it's about what you offer.
I feel it. More and more people, I think, are waking up to this, and I think that truth is becoming really a scarce asset, but more and more, like, you can't suppress it. Like, it's going to come out one way or the other, regardless of how and what you define as truth. So,
yeah, interesting, because we're all getting bombarded with things that are supposed to be truth all the time, and it's very difficult to well,
yeah.
But the only way I can deal with that is I go back inside. Does it resonate with me? Does it resonate in my body as being true? Is it a useful truth? Is it creative? Those questions I ask myself. If it's not, then I'm okay. I don't care if it's true or not. I'm not interested. Yeah.
Okay, that's probably a good way to end the interview. If people want to know you more, I'm not sure if you like to be public. I know that you do still, spend some of your time.
I'm doing a thing for men on purpose, sovereignty and purpose. Archetypes, and do a lot of stuff on archetypes. So I'll be doing that. I'm doing a couple of those residential woodland retreats this year, and it'll be advertised under Breaking the Spell. Breaking the spell is what we're trying to do, really. We're trying to break the spell of whatever spell we've been under and liberate ourselves. So, yeah, breaking the spell, sovereignty and purpose for men. And the Mankind Project, of course, is always chugging along, as you know. Yeah.
Yes, sir. I'll be sure to include the links there. And Michael, thank you very, very much for the interview, for your time, and for all the wisdom. I think this is a must watch. So thank you.
Thank you. See you again. Bye-bye now.